All right, everyone. So this is a panel that I'm very much interested. I usually would be in this panel in the last years, in the last, let's say, decade, because collaboration is my thing. I love it, but I wanted to step aside and to hear and to learn. And I'm I believe that this is an unbelievable panel because I know the work of everyone that is involved here. And I'm very eager to hear all what you guys have to say. Alexandre Aroeira is one good fellow, very respected lawyer in Brazil. And Alexandre, my good friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leo. I say that today we have a kind of a dream team of collaboration. David Musi, Howard, and Wolfgang is a very important to listen from them this discussion. And a young, brilliant lawyer from Italy, Eduardo. Our panel, as you know, is a collaboration, a solution. We could see the last panel, the COVID pandemic has created a series of challenges, causing disruption to projects around the world and placing many in the construction industry under serious strain. In this context, it is tempting for parties to isolate themselves from one another, to analyze their contracts and prepare for taut negotiations, with each side fighting to achieve the best outcomes for themselves. This approach has, however, been proven to be counterproductive in many circumstances, leading to disputes that are costly for both sides, incomplete projects and business relationships that are damaged. The purpose of this panel is to explore whether there could be an alternative to this scenario and how collaborative methodologies can be adopted to provide the solutions to the challenges that the construction industry is currently facing. For these important discussions, as I said, we have this great team, Professor David Musi, Director of the King's College London Centre of Construction Law, who is author of the FAC1 Framework Alliance Contract, now translated for use in Brazil and already used in over $15 billion of procurement worldwide. Professor Musi, my close colleague, use collaborative contracts to set up new improvement process and to integrate contributions to BIM. It's a great pleasure to have Professor Dave Musi with us today. We have Howard Ashcraft, an American attorney and partner at the firm Hansel Bridget in San Francisco. Specialized in construction. He is also an adjunct professor at Stanford University and a member of the American Institute of Architects, California Council. Participating in the task force, Howard developed the theoretical and practical underpinning for integrated project delivery, a project delivery approach that integrates people, system, business, structures, and practice into a collaborative process to optimize project results. And Wolfgang, Dr. Wolfgang Bryan is a leading German and international construction lawyer, founder of a specialist construction law firm with offices in Germany and across Europe, and a lecturer at the University of Stuttgart, where he established the master program in international construction, law and practice, as well as a lecturer at King's College in London. He is also chairman of both the Anglo-German Construction Law Platform and the International Construction Law Association. Dr. Breyer has been at the forefront in bringing together the civil and common law jurisdiction to solve complex legal problems with particular expertise in international construction contracts. And most recently, Dr. Breyer has spearheaded the introduction of collaborative multi-party contracts into the German market. Earlier this year, he completed a German adaptation of FAC1, and he has pioneered the first IPD-based pilot project in Germany. Eduardo Parisi is an Italian lawyer, PhD and research fellow in administrative law at the University of Milan. He is responsible for international relations of the European Association of Public-Private Partnership and collaborates with the Inter-University Center for Construction Law and Management. One of the areas of focus of Dr. Parisi's research is the field of collaborative contract law and public procurement, and he was part of the research group that drafted the first form collaborative contract in Italy in partnership with King's College of London. Well, it's a great opportunity to be here with all of you. We chose to develop this talk show when we have 2 rounds of questions for the panelists, where responses to the questions should be kept between 3 and 5 minutes, please. And finally, Q&As, when I encourage our participants to ask questions for this great collaboration dream team. I'd like to start with David. David, having worked on a significant number of projects and collaborative contracts, where the parties have carefully considered the risk involved, would you say that such allocation of risks has been somehow useful to deal with the pandemic? Or do you think, David, that the pandemic required completely new ideas, new solutions, or changes in the initial allocation of risks or other contractual provisions? And how can a collaborative framework operate in this context that we are living?
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Really good question. We've heard in the previous session about renegotiation, about alternative dispute resolution, and about good faith. I think all of these might work, but they're uncertain. And I certainly wouldn't start there if we're trying to look at effective risk management. So if we're asking, is collaboration a potential answer, a potential solution to something as dreadful as the pandemic, I would say it is half of the solution. The other half is early contractor involvement. I think we have to keep our feet on the ground. And by early contractor involvement, what I'm trying to do is create contractual systems that connect the client, the consultants, the main contractor, the key subcontractors, so that they exchange data and agree it, and that's design, cost, time, data, agree it before they start construction, and so that they look at risks together before they start construction. And those risks, if you look at them together with this data in a team, in a structure, through a contract process, might enable you to reduce those risks, certainly creates the environment in which you understand each other's position better and understand what you might have to do with risks when issues arise in the future. So the first thing I would say is, yes, we need a new system if we see the old system as a single stage procurement with a load of documents prepared by a consultant and imposed on a contractor who, of course, says yes, but never gets to provide their input or their proper commitment, and therefore feels free to exploit errors and omissions later. And until we get away from that, until we use contracts for early conditional appointment of the team to validate data and to look at risk, we can't really expect people to collaborate later on. So we have a pandemic, we have an event we're calling force majeure. We can't deal with that. We can't prevent it because we didn't see it coming. But we can at least have better knowledge through early preparation of how cost is incurred, how time is incurred, and what it is fair and reasonable and essential to do in order to keep the team members solvent. And more importantly, having built up relationships, you can use a rapid response system of early warning, of collective decision-making in a core group to deal with this force majeure event. In other words, so as to avoid unilateral action, enforcement, so as to avoid the uncertainty of going to the court and asking about good faith, of going on the first rung of the disputes ladder, to avoid all of that, if you can get the team together with data through early warning and a core group, you stand a good chance. Now, I will close with an example, not from the pandemic. We've had some great examples of collaborative frameworks working very well in the pandemic through the means I've described. But my more powerful example was a $900 million hospital in Dubai when the global financial crisis hit, which was, again, a wholly unexpected, unmanageable event. They built up their cost and time data, they had their early warning system, they had their core group, and they agreed mitigating actions. They understood where profit lay, where cost lay, they understood priorities, and eventually, like so many projects, they had to terminate it because it was unsustainable. But it was very interesting. The same client, Dubai World, had 80 FIDIC contracts, nearly all of which ended in dispute because of a unilateral, because all they offered back in the day was a unilateral decision, terminate or don't terminate, suspend or don't suspend. They didn't have an early warning or a decision-making forum, nor did they have early contractor involvement to build up an agreed position. So they managed the risk collaboratively by meeting and dealing with known data. So in that sense, a new system, it's not that new because we've proven it, but it certainly is not yet the norm. A new system is required.
Very, very good, David. Well, Wolfgang, you are a German lawyer in a civil law jurisdiction, but you knows well the English system, where the approach to the contract law is very different. How does the shadow of the law in each jurisdiction impact on the motivation of the parties to collaborate and the outcome of such collaboration? How do the dispute resolution process provided for in contracts or the applicable civil justice system impact on this, Wolfgang? And perhaps there's a more complex, expensive, or inefficient dispute resolution process stimulate collaboration?
Well, first of all, Alex, the problem with so many compliments in beforehand is that your dream team have to live with that kind of pressure, and therefore I hope that we can live up to your expectations. Let me first thank you, Leonardo and IBDiC, for providing the opportunity to ICLA to act as a co-organizer of this great event today. Let me start with the first question. I mean, the legal framework in terms of civil law systems motivates people to act as it is within the framework. And if you simply do an analysis on any kind of civil law jurisdiction, you will easily find out that all of these laws provide predominantly for duties, for rights, and sanctions. So if a party fails to meet the respective requirements, we're talking about sanctions. So therefore, I mean, people act accordingly. And this leads inevitably to disputes. That's in a nutshell the summary of in terms of motivation of the law. In order to collaborate, to motivate people to collaborate, the law certainly is not the right tool to motivate people. This means that you have to form your own framework. What David did in terms of FIC1 and PPC, and Howard in terms of IPD, the alliancing, the Australian alliancing approach is a little bit different, but driven by the same motivation. So therefore, you need to motivate people to collaborate, because otherwise they wouldn't do it. The idea behind is, amongst others, to combine the different interests of any parties to a multi-party contract in order to have to establish a common goal in terms of economy. If you look at any kind of traditional system in terms of contract, you will find, at least as to major projects, you will have numerous bilateral contracts. We actually counted them in one project, and only as to the contracts which were visible to the employer, we counted more than 650 bilateral contracts. And you then ask yourself the question whether the different interest of any party to any contract here, which sums up to 1,200, is the same or even close to the interest of the project, meaning the employer. You will easily come to the conclusion that they aren't, that they can't be. So therefore, one of the approaches in terms of motivating people to collaborate is give them a common goal. That's quite simple. As to your second question in terms of ADR or dispute resolution mechanism, I think we have that. IPD provides, or the different IPD standard forms of contract provide for ADR concepts similar to David's FSC and PPC contracts, except Australian alliancing doesn't, because they don't have disputes at all. That's also one solution. But they play a different role compared to traditional concepts. Let me try to describe it with the following words. If you consider these concepts in terms of multi-party collaborative contracts as being ADR systems by themselves, you're not wrong. Because what is the purpose behind an ADR system of any kind whatsoever? To solve disputes. But if you don't have disputes, there's nothing to be solved. So therefore, if you consider the structure of the different collaborative standard forms of contract and approaches, you will find out that all of them provides for a decision-making body which is in the center of the project. So it is called core group or project management team or alliancing steering group, call it whatever you want. But this is a decision-making body, and decisions have to be made unanimously. So you might ask yourself the question, how is that possible? It is possible unless and until they share the same vision in terms of what is the common aim and goal, which leads me to what I said earlier on. So therefore, we do have that. It differs from contract to contract. You might have a mediation conciliation in the first place, afterwards an adjudication, at the end of the day, hopefully arbitration. It is good advice not to refer any kind of disputes to courts based on these concepts. But as I said, I think they play simply a different role. We have that, we need them, but the number of disputes, according to the project so far we have seen has reduced dramatically by the system itself, by applying the system itself. So therefore, your last question, whether or not an efficient dispute resolution stimulates collaboration, and the answer to that question is quite clear. No, it doesn't, it can't. But I don't think that we have that kind of problem.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you very much. Howard, well, given your extensive experience developing and working with collaborative methodologies, such as integrated project delivery, how do you consider that such methodologies can provide solutions through collaboration, where there are events of force majeure and in relation to the difficulties that are currently being faced on construction projects, and describe the last panel?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak to everyone today. My only disappointment is that I'm not in Brazil, but perhaps at another time we can solve that problem. David and Wolfgang actually have already touched on a few of the points, but what we've actually found is that IPD is resilient. And by that I mean that essentially when we have had disturbances, no project goes perfectly. Things go wrong. The question is, what happens when things go wrong? And what we found with the IPD projects is that things that go wrong often bring the team is brought together. And in fact, because we have all the key participants working together, first place, we've already developed the relationships for them to work together. So we're not sort of saying this is something new, how are we going to deal with this problem? We've been dealing with problems all through the project. It's now a bigger problem, but we already have a process for how we deal with problems. The second thing is the structure itself. By pooling all the profit together, by creating an alignment of the parties around what the project goal is, by having this joint project decision-making technique, which Wolfgang talked about and also referenced a little bit, we actually get a situation where we have the process, the procedure, we already have the alignment, and we have the motivation, because in fact, even if you could go to a contractual clause and perhaps argue your point, the truth is, when there's a major impact, everyone is disturbed. And the best outcome is actually to solve the problem. So we actually, to some degree, for those of you who followed some of the work from Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan, who's very much involved with risk, there's also the concept of anti-fragile, where actually through stress, we grow stronger. And in fact, what we've seen on IPD projects is stress actually can strengthen the team because we, as I said, have these processes, have joint alignment, have a number of other things. And we've actually, University of Minnesota study actually supports this. They found that the projects were more resilient than traditional projects. And we've seen a number of examples. David mentioned his example with regarding to Dubai. We've had situations where we've had major shocks to the system, either because a significant party became incapable of pursuing or changes in the market. And the teams have adapted, because the first step in order to basically have the best outcome individually was to create the best outcome for the project. And that required adaptation. And that is essentially a relational contract approach that is built into IPD. So we're currently seeing, I have two kinds of projects. I have my integrated projects, which is the bulk of what I do, but I still have some traditional projects. The traditional projects dealing with COVID are all just figuring out who and how and when claims are made. They clearly are going to go into some form of a claim situation. The IPD projects are figuring out how do we deal with this problem together. And that difference in mind shift is significant. Out of the 175 IPD projects our teams put together. We have one project that may go to a claim because I think one of the parties really never understood how the contract works and thinks they still can. But 175 projects without a formal dispute or even the dispute resolution provisions being triggered, I think is a pretty phenomenal outcome.
Thank you, Howard. It's a music of my ears. Very good. Eduardo, you are Italian, and in our perspective in Brazil, we have a lot of curiosity if collaboration can work well in a country like Italy. Yeah? And you having worked in implementation of collaboration methodologies on projects in Italy. Considering the standard practice for construction projects in your country, do you see that there are any difficulties from a business culture perspective in implementing collaborative methodologies? And Eduardo, would the pandemic provide a different perspective on implementing such methods?
Thank you, and thank you for giving me the possibility to be here. I can speak for my experience with the University of Milan and with the Italian Center of Construction Law and Management, which has cooperated for long with the King's College London. And thanks to this cooperation and this work, I can say that collaborative practice are actually spreading intensively in Italy. Even after the conclusion of the first collaborative project of public procurement for the realization of a public school and a civic center in a municipality very close here to Milan, the economic operators and the clients, both on the public and private sector, are realizing the opportunities of collaborative procurement. And even in our experience, I have to say that both contractors and clients are able to capture what are the values of collaboration, especially in relation to time and cost control, to the shared management of unforeseen events, and also to a consistent supply chain management. Well, you asked me about the difficulties. We experienced some difficulties initially because, of course, this method of work is very different from what is the experience, what is the common experience of the Italian market and sector of construction industry. First of all, the Italian market is not accustomed to, not even to use standard model contracts. Bespoke contracts in procurement are very, very widely used, and these are usually based on traditional clauses that puts clients in adversarial terms with the contractors and tier one contractors with subcontractors. And of course, these clauses are not flexible enough, usually, if not sometimes, to follow the development of the works on site. And also, secondly, we experience that operators usually find some resistance in understanding why should they do additional work in a collaborative perspective if the incentive is not clear. And in particular, at an initial stage, we found some difficulties in the collaborative project that we follow in explaining the reason for the institution of bodies and the institution of management figures and the institution of mandatory moments of confrontation to deal with issues. And we think that all this is changing also in light of the fact that the pandemic has brought the realization of the need for this instrument and the realization of the inadequacies of the traditional way of procuring. We experienced that in this period of time. It was in the 100% of the cases with bespoke contracts that we followed and we researched on. There was it was extremely complex to understand and to manage the clauses of force majeure, of factum principis related to the dispositions of administrative authorities, and also to the suspensions of works that were implemented as a mechanism of organization of the contractors, because, for instance, there was a lack of personnel or a lack of safety instruments. So all these problems can only be dealt with a consistent framework that carries out a unique risk management system, that has a unique timetable, and that has a strong management that is aware of all the complexities and is able to solve them by putting all together and creating synergies.
Wow, well done, Eduardo. Thank you. Wow, I'd like to start the second round with Howard. Asking Howard, you of course, you talked a little bit about it, but is it possible, in your point of view, for parts to adopt collaborative approaches, even where it's not provided for in their contracts? And if so, what suggestions would you have for parties in this situation, in particular in case of force majeure? Only to add our perspective, in Brazil, I could see the first time parties in a normal EPC contract, in adversarial contracts, after the pandemic, starting the first time to think about collaborative approach to solve these big issues. What do you think, Howard, about it?
There's really some two kinds of answers to two situations there. And the first one, really pretty much from a legal perspective, is yes, you can, but, and there's a very big but. And the issue here is that what we found, and we've worked with a lot of collaborative projects that are not full IPD or not full alliances. And if you add collaboration to a traditional framework, and if it's a good project with a good team, it gets better. In other words, it allows them to achieve more than they would have achieved had you not added the additional facilitation, the additional issues for collaboration. What it doesn't help is help a bad project keep from failing. Because what happens is when the project then goes, essentially something happens, there's a major disturbance, the team will go back and say, well, what are my rights under the contract? And now you will get essentially the entire thing starts unraveling. So it doesn't have, if you don't have the contractual support either under the PPC 2000 with David, under our IPD contracts and various IPD contracts, those which Wolfgang and others have put together, you don't have the glue that holds it together when things are going wrong. So the sense is, can you add collaboration? Yes. Will it help a good project? Yes. Will it keep your projects reliable and resilient? No. The other thing is that, and this is perhaps a common law perspective, the contracts give you, a traditional common law contract, certain rights and obligations. If, however, you act inconsistently, you act differently than that contract says, you may have waived many of those rights and responsibilities. So what actually happens if you have this distinction between your contract says act in your own self-interest, but your collaborative piece is saying act in the project's interest, you now have a conflict between the contract and the way you've acted, which actually gives a great opportunity for those of us who still do some litigation, because we now have a situation where there's an argument that various rights have been waived. So what I'm saying is that there's actually a downside to actually applying collaboration in a situation where it doesn't work on top. But will it make a good project and good team go better? Yes. Now, the second thing is that if you start looking at projects not as a single project, but as a program, where, for instance, the same essential set of contractors and designers will work on multiple projects for the same client, which exists, for instance, when you have fairly large industrial manufacturers. In those instances, the parties will tend to start thinking about their self-interest in terms of multiple contracts. And in that instance, they may say, yes, a bad thing has happened to us on contract A, but I really want to get contract B. So therefore, I will act in a more collaborative way in A. So what I'm saying is in programs, it is sometimes easier to develop this long-term collaboration if the parties know they must rely upon each other for a long period of time. But that's a small subset of the types of projects. So my basic answer is yes, but, and there are risks when you do so. So what we normally tell people is if you want to go to deep collaboration, the safest and best way to do it is to go all the way. Everyone thinks that the half step is better, easier, safer to do, but in fact, the whole step is actually better, easier, and safer to do.
Excellent, Howard. Excellent. I agree completely. Eduardo, in the path of the Howard and in relation to projects in Italy that have implemented collaborative methodologies, what are the solutions that have been adopted to deal with the impact of the pandemic? Could you have some case like this to share with us?
Well, I have to say that in our experience, the pandemic, first of all, implemented greatly the spread of collaborative methodologies. We could verify it by the way in which clients and public clients especially are responding to these specific moments, pushing towards the adoption of collaborative procurement. And we saw it in a new project related to the construction, of a facility for our university that in this moment is being pushed in, also thanks to the acknowledgement of the need to change. As for the reasons why the collaboration helps and is an answer to the problems created by the pandemics, we have experienced in our collaborative projects, first of all, that the draft of contractual clauses of framework contracts requires a comprehensive approach. And this approach must be aware of all the possible relationships among the parties involved and of the possible risks. Only by creating a network such as the one that the Framework Alliance contract of the King's College is able to provide, it is possible to study in advance possible issues and to attribute responsibilities. Otherwise, they would go on separate ways. And this was very helpful in, for instance, in the project that I mentioned before of construction. Then also the assurance of a strong management to a party, to an alliance manager, allows confrontation and allows thinking about what is the common target. And this is a great help to avoid the partial views that naturally all the operators and all the alliance members have. Also the participation of stakeholders and supply management was pivotal in the cases that we studied, because for instance, in situational standoffs, the contribution of all the parties may very well offer some technical expedients and solutions that may very well be accepted as by the client as efficient, or by the tier 1 contractors as solutions to the problem. And this also was experienced in one of our cases, in which in exchange for a direct payment of a subcontractors, a new material, a new and an efficient material was provided, and so that in order to facilitate the the solution of a problem that was created on site. And also, Professor Mosi mentioned it before, early warning techniques are one of the main instruments that allows for cooperation and cooperative solutions of problems. This is not provided to push forward people to assume responsibility in order to be sanctioned, but to make members engaged and put forward solutions to the problem to be discussed and to be acquired if this is convenient to the group. So all these are great instruments that were provided in the model that we adopted and that we verified could be of use in these situations.
Thank you, Eduardo. Wolfgang, do you agree with Eduardo? And in Brazil, when we tried, and we are working hard with including David Musi to implement and to show for all Brazilian business in construction the importance of collaborative way, Howard has helping a lot too. The implementation of collaborative structures. But the first question normally Brazilians use to say is, but collaborative is very good in common law system, not in civil law system. Of course, I don't agree, but I'd like to listen from you. What suggestion would you have for people looking to adopt collaborative methodologies in countries under a civil law system, especially consider the uncertainties brought about, for example, by the pandemic?
Right. I don't agree either, because this is not an issue of different law systems, rather than the structure of all of the law systems, irrespective whether we're talking about civil law systems, different civil law codes. All of them I know provide for the system I described earlier on. So in order to, if I may add a comment to Howard's question, to your question, whether collaboration is possible without a contract providing rules and provisions on collaboration, Howard said, yes, but a big but. I would say no, because people are not motivated. It is a clash of interests based on the bilateral approaches. If people look at their own interests, if they look at their own rights, they will always follow. They have to follow. That's commercial law. They have to follow their own interests. So therefore, that is the first issue. Secondly, collaboration is easy said, but collaboration has to be organized. It is all to bring all these people together is a question of project management, and this is quite challenging. So therefore, I mean, I remember a comment of a user for the first time of a collaborative contract, not in Germany but elsewhere. He said, whilst reading the contract, which was completely different to what he was used to, he said, "Well, they are written like a manual. They describe how and when each party gets together, etc., and so forth." So it is a different approach, and it has nothing to do with the legal system itself behind. So I can't identify in this respect any kind of difference between common and civil law countries. So as to the advice in terms of, or against the background of the current situation, meaning the pandemic, I do have a good example on that, I believe, which proves, which provides evidence on that these concepts are simply superior to traditional concepts. They are more flexible. So what we had in Germany, what we have seen, what we have witnessed so far was the following. One of our first major projects, based on a multi-party collaborative contract, was within the process of doing all the drawings, plannings, just before the planning permission was submitted. this was in March this year, the coronavirus appeared. So the project is a hotel. And even worse, it is a Congress hotel. So it provides space, room for conferences up to 1,500 people. It probably doesn't come as a surprise when I now report that the investor became a little bit reluctant in terms of whether this is, given these times, still the right idea. So he decided to suspend the works, to put it on hold. So what would have happened if this decision would have made based on bilateral traditional concepts? It's relatively easy. You would have, irrespective what kind of contract you were using, it would have been considered as being a suspension, and as the duration is now more than 6 months, probably and highly likely as a termination, to be more precise, for its own convenience. And the consequences are well known, and it would have cost a lot of money for the employer to make that decision, so he probably wouldn't have made it. In our case, it was completely different. It was a decision, as I said, by that kind of management board, unanimously, since there were no special and different economic interests involved. It was easy for the team to say, okay, that's fine for me. Let's suspend the works for a while. Let's mitigate damage in order to, everyone did his best to reduce the efforts, and so on and so forth. So it was a decision made on one day, a discussion, 3 hours, and the decision was made, and the project is ready to be restarted now. This is simply not possible if you do have traditional contracts. And yeah, I mean, we were not hoping that we had to figure out that kind of advantage of that project, but it happened. And so therefore people are very happy, even if the reason for that is not very pleasant. But it turned out that these concepts are so flexible. I even go so far to say simply they are simply superior for complex, for major projects, rather than any projects.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Excellent. And David, looking to the future, what role will collaboration have in the new normal, this new normal? I'm not sure about this new normal, but suppose the new normal. And what lessons can we learn from past projects and experience to help us to adopt collaborative approaches most effectively?
I think we should stop talking about it, and I think we should start doing it. People love to talk about collaboration. Intellectually, we could talk about good faith. I do it with my students, partly because there is so much case law based on good faith. And that just distracts everybody into a theoretical discussion. COVID-19 is not a theoretical problem, it's a real problem. And it has shown us, as Howard said, that teams that are collaborative can be resilient and can adapt. And in other examples, the teams that are not collaborative don't. So we know the lesson. The lesson is not to say, well, let's just carry on with the same old stuff and hope for the best. We want to do something. So the question is do we want options and uncertainty by having another debate around good faith, or do we want commitments? And commitments come through a combination of procurement systems and contracts. How do we select? When do we select? Who do we select? And how do we connect them together? If we don't do that, if we think it's just fiddling around the edges later on, or we think it's against a Brazilian mentality or a Russian mentality or a German mentality, it's so easy to talk. I mean, I have in many countries over many years listened to people saying no in many different ways because it doesn't suit them. But the evidence of COVID-19 is horribly telling that we were right. And as Wolfgang eloquently put it, these are not options to be discussed over dinner. these are superior methodologies, if they're a methodology. So the first thing I would say is do it. The second thing I would do is say appoint Alexandre or Leonardo or Howard or Wolfgang or Eduardo. Appoint them as your lawyers, your advisors, because they have insurance and they are going to do the right thing and get away from the theoretical discussion into the implementation. If you appoint someone who is cynical about collaboration, you won't do it. It's again, people appoint someone, they think it is safer to have an advisor who is not too enthusiastic. And of course, you can suck the air out of any good idea and revert to something very boring. But it's not only boring in this case, it is demonstrably not workable. So the third thing I would say very predictably is use a standard form of contract. We have gone to enormous trouble to create standard forms. Howard has one for IPD. I developed PPC in the UK, most recently with pretty much everybody in Italy, in Germany, in Brazil, in Russia, in Spain, in Bulgaria. We have developed a flexible form, FAC1, translated, adapted for civil law. All of the objections are falling away. You don't have to spend money on a new contract, nor do you have to abandon everything you've ever done, because you can, if you do the FAC approach, integrate your traditional, your national contracts with FAC. If you've got the courage of your convictions, you want to go the whole way, you can use PPC 2000 or Howard's IPD contract. The point is, there are contractual solutions. So I think that we have, for all the wrong reasons, because nobody wanted a pandemic, for all the wrong reasons, we have a more compelling case for effective change and the adoption of superior collaborative working than ever, if we can get away from the vague intellectual academic debates and get our feet on the ground and deal with real contractual processes. So I'm passionate about that, and I really do commend 143 participants to go and speak to one of the advisors they can see on the screen about how they could implement that tomorrow.
Excellent, David. I remember the first time I watched you talking about FAC1, I think that 4 or 5 years ago in London, in King's College, some attendee asked, Professor, but this collaborative pathway is work only because culture, we needed to change first the culture. And you asked, and you explained perfectly, no, it's not culture, it's Excel, is a mathematic way to understand the best way to do the correct thing. And I got the okay, David, please.
No, I was going to say it is a very interesting point, because talking about culture can either be a necessity because people have to implement these contracts. You can't just force them upon people and then walk away. So on the one hand, it's a necessity, and Howard and Eduardo and Wolfgang and I live this every day. On the other hand, it's another way of saying no, because it takes you into vague territory that, because you're not sure when has the culture been changed in such a way. So the two go hand in hand. I wouldn't take anything away from the culture, but I'm very suspicious of people who say you have to do that first.
Very good. And when you gave us opportunity to translate from English to Portuguese, the FAC1, first I tried to understand if it's compatible between our systems. And our civil law is perfect, received very well FAC1, and it's completely useful to be implemented in projects in Brazil. And Howard, when we talked about your integrated project delivery, I don't know if you remember, but you sent me a lot of materials to study. And I chose one of them perhaps the main didactic material, and I like it, and I realized that it's useful, worked very well in Brazilian system, in the civil law system, especially in Brazilian, because our civil law, Eduardo, is very, very open for the parts to decide the best to them. I'd like to start the third panel, or the third round of this second panel, and I cannot avoid to invite Leonardo to participate with us, because Leonardo is a very good friend, my colleague, and we are together trying in IBDiC, trying to put collaborative ways in place, in a good place in Brazil. And Leonardo, I think that we can do it together. I ask you, Leonardo, do you have some good question to discuss with our dream team?
I would have several questions. I'm here helping myself of getting crashing the panel, because I've discussed that for hours with David when he was here, and also I'm also very enthusiastic. I agree very much with David that we have to get our hands dirty, because it's getting, I'm not sure, I'm talking about that for 10 years at least, and I'm saying we need to show people in a pragmatic fashion what do they have to do, and that's the kind of question that I want to raise here for maybe David, Howard, or both, anyone who wants to touch upon that, is when you choose a delivery method, for example, when you use a EPC contract, you kind of know what are the downsides and what are the key aspects that the project manager, the decision person has to be careful. For example, quality is an issue in EPC because there is an incentive for you to sometimes deliver less quality work. So there are downsides for every choice. There are, and it's clearly there are some downsides for choosing an alliance or IPD or ECI, any model that is collaboration. Of course, they are not the same, but I would like you to address a little bit of the downside. What should our decision makers be concerned so that they have the courage to understand that there's not such a big deal, first of all, and but yes, there might be points that you have to be very careful not to let to drop the ball, because it seems too perfect to believe, so nobody believes.
can I come in on that, because this is
please.
This is for the 138 people who are still on the call, and it's the point that in Brazil we're mostly looking at major EPC contracts as the norm. That is our starting point. Now, I've encountered the same thing in Russia, and also Eduardo and I, with a major energy company in Italy, who shall remain nameless just for now, have encountered the same thing transnationally. Their starting point is an EPC contract. Now, I don't think we should look at all at a binary decision between an EPC contract or a collaborative approach. If we put to one side the way that Howard goes about his business, and he will talk about that later because he has adopted and implemented and proven a pure form of collaboration, I am interested in impact in a way that many, many people can access. So if I talk about an EPD contract, I'm interested in how do you connect that to the pre-construction phase design consultancy appointments, to the site investigation appointments. How do you give the client access to the specialist subcontractors and manufacturers, and how do you connect them to the operators after the project is complete? So the approach in Brazil to me is not jumping from a tall building and hoping that the parachute works. It is taking an EPD contract, and this is where Wolfgang will disagree for reasons he said, but you know, we take an EPD contract and build collaboration around it through an overarching FAC1 approach, because that is what the energy company in Italy has determined to do in projects in 3 jurisdictions. And it's what the Russians are proposing to do. And we then have the ability to see how additional mechanisms and additional data and additional connections and integration bring benefits. Then you can have another look at your EPD contract and say, is it fit for purpose? You could do that in 5 years' time. Leonardo, Alexandre, you could prove this using whatever Brazilian EPD contracts people want. I well appreciate Wolfgang and Howard would say there's a danger of reversion to brutal enforcement. I completely accept that. But I think that if we want action, we need an incremental approach. So I've not answered your question, I've answered a different question. The downside is too big a jump and nobody will do it. That's the downside, and that's why after 20 years of promoting these forms, Howard and I think, have been in this game longer than anyone. We still are very irritated by the logic not taking people to the right conclusion. So I think the big jump and the non-adoption is the risk. I do not see other downsides.
Can I add, Leonardo, one more comment?
Please.
To that, as to the downsides. I would like to answer that question with another question. Given the approach, which reflects the idea of all collaborative multi-party projects approaches I know, is to get that early contractor involvement in terms of the process of preparing the drawings are done by both the designers, any specialists, and the contractors, who are at the end of the day supposed to carry out what was planned or what was designed, right? For a long time, they're not only watching the game, observing it, they're assisting, they're supporting directly. And my question now is, let's assume a project based on a multi-party collaborative approach goes wrong, whatever it means, how to define it went wrong. But let's assume that for a while. Then you should ask yourself the question, what would have happened if the parties had used traditional concepts without having contractors involved in the whole design? And I believe everyone can answer this question by themselves, even if the design made on a collaborative multi-party project by all of the people is not good. It would be certainly worse if a designer on its own would have prepared it and afterwards handed it over to a contractor. I'm 100% sure. So therefore, this is the answer to the downside in terms of the nature of these concepts.
Actually, if I can add to the doctors, Mosey and Breyer, we actually have that example. The one project that I mentioned that could go into a claim because the contractor really does not understand and tried to fight the whole system. That project has problems. The owner of that project has decided to implement their entire 5-year plan under an IPD format, even with that project, because they said, had that project been anything other than IPD, it would have been a total disaster instead of a problem. And so they're actually committed to moving into deeper collaboration, even though they've actually had a bump in the road. With regard to intermediate processes, one of the things, without getting too academic, I'd like to say is that structure affects behavior. If you get the structure right, it tends to lead the team. And in fact, you can think of it as behavioral modification. We talked about culture. You can build culture in a project if you set it up right. If you actually have the structures correct, the business model, the contract model, the governance model, all those things are appropriate, then in fact, you will tend to get to the right solution. If in fact you have some of them wrong, because you're trying to essentially apply collaboration, to this extent I'm agreeing with Wolfgang, if you try to apply collaboration on top of the wrong structure, it can work in the same way that if you put excess energy into a system, you can get to a result, but it's taking a lot of extra effort, a lot of good faith by parties, a lot of things in order to get there that you could have used actually making the project better. You've essentially absorbed a lot of your energy in the project just trying to survive. So your systems are better if you get your structures right. It makes it easier to do. It removes the dysfunction. So one of those things on projects, and there's talk about early contractor involvement, dispute, various things people have touched on in this. We tend to take an approach where we start off at the beginning and saying, what is the goal of this project? What is the deep why? What are we trying to do? Then we want to make sure that our structures, our business models, which are very adaptable, our other models are basically designed to achieve those ends, so that in fact we've removed the dysfunctions and we've created the right incentives for things to actually happen. And that part needs to be looked at on every single project. And people will say, well, I'd rather just sign a contract. I don't want to spend the time and effort. That process of aligning the team and all the participants is actually immensely valuable, because that's where you first start building the deep collaboration and the common commitment to a goal. So don't think that just by picking up a piece of paper and signing it, you've done it. It's by discussing that piece of paper and making that piece of paper actually fit your project that you actually start building the first steps to a superior result.
Howard, very, very good. Including in Brazil, we tried to implement some alliance contracts in the past, and exactly because we failed it. Wrong way to use the structure of the contract and choosing wrong way. And in this pathway, we have a very good question from Julio Bueno, asking for all of you, taking into consideration the evolution in alliance and partnering since the Andrew Field BP project in 1990. Can you say that we are now finally converging to the age of collaborative contracts? And how has the pandemic catalyzed this path to collaboration? Well, you can decide the first.
I'll jump in. Always happy to jump in. It's very interesting talking to energy companies that they haven't universally adopted what they proved in the North Sea. It's very interesting talking to Heathrow Airport that they haven't universally adopted what they proved on Terminal 5. And I think we're all well aware as we look around us that progression is not guaranteed or indeed likely, it seems. You know, we politically or socially or economically, we're subject to all sorts of things, and the COVID-19 event is the latest. So I think we are not entering the age of collaboration at all. I'd like to think so. I'd love that to be the case. I don't think we are. I think we are looking for new tools. I think we are recognizing that the blunt instrument of a single stage take it or leave it tender leaves us short of information, short of machinery. We have not talked very much about building information modeling, but we have the technology to integrate teams, and we're not using it. I see building information used in isolation by an architect, in isolation by an engineer. An extraordinary situation. We have an international standard of BIM that demands collaboration, but people are still not fully using it. So we have, I think, let us put it differently, the age of systematic integration, I think, has arrived at construction. The way that we bring that to life requires collaboration. I've made it very clear that I worry about starting with a collaborative demand because it seems to confuse so many people. But I think people do understand integration, they do understand data, and if we start there, then I think we can effect real change and collaboration comes to life.
Giulio, he can hear me, but he can't speak. But if you allow me, Alex, to add one more thing to that, is first of all, I agree with David for obvious reasons that we are not yet, at least, in that age of collaboration contracts. But I believe the question of whether or not we will be depends very much on the market. We have to distinguish between two different parties to the market. All of us are probably aware of that so-called collaborative approaches were developed a long time ago by the industry in order to escape from what David described as take it or leave it or cut-throwing competition and things like that. That was, for obvious reasons, the interest of the whole industry, because it's simply, it was not good for the whole industry. But the acceptance of these approaches were not very impressive because from an employer's point of view, I mean, if you find another stupid contractor who gives you another discount of 20%, who takes on all the risks, it is hard to say no, even if you have a better, a superior approach, which is complex, which also takes efforts. So therefore, I mean, it very much depends on the market. In Germany, we do have a different market now. It has been a while, for 3 years ago, where employers, or actually the other way around, contractors are really, they have been really rare in terms of that stupidity, that approach. They say they're in a comfortable situation. They can now do some cherry picking. They say, I'm doing quite nicely. So what do you want from me? Here are my conditions. Take it or leave it. So quite the opposite of what we have seen and witnessed within the last probably 40 years or so. So therefore, and COVID hasn't changed anything, at least in Germany, on that situation so far, I have to say. So it very much depends if the market allows that these projects and these approaches can prove what they can and to prove that they're superior. Then we might have a real chance to enter sometime in that, what Julia described as being the age of collaborative contracts.
And my viewpoint is perhaps slightly different in that I agree that we are not in the age of collaborative contracts. The vast majority of contracts are traditional contracts executed in a traditional way with, frankly, traditional results. And you would think that given the superior results that have been shown that everyone would immediately flock to doing collaborative projects, but they don't. And there's a couple of reasons for that. You have to actually look at the structures that are even outside the industry. You have to look at how projects are financed. You have to look at actually how taxes are done. You have to look at a lot of different issues, how insurance traditionally has been built up over time and what it covers. It actually tends to drive towards the wrong results. And so there's a lot of pressures, and the number of people that if you would just go out on the street and ask people, if you have a bid, do you get the best possible price? So many people will say yes, despite the fact there is zero research to support that position. It's just a common belief. And so there are a lot of things we're having to go through. That being said, I am seeing a significant uptick in the number of owners and teams that want to actually execute on IBD projects. I get cold calls from people I've never heard of who have very interesting projects who say, we need a better way. We're starting. Can you talk to us about what we might be able to do? And what was originally a fairly small group of projects is now, in fact, a wide variety of project types. And certainly we're seeing a lot more internationally in terms of collaborative project development. So we don't have a tidal wave or a tsunami of collaboration coming upon us, but I think that the water is rising. And as we get more and more successful projects and more, and there, by the way, there are people who step back. We have had some owners that have had tremendous success and then suddenly stopped. This is the Terminal 5 type issue. And it generally has to do with the change in ownership, or it has to do with different philosophy from senior people will suddenly change what the institution, even though they've been successful. But I do see that the water is rising. And we do see more projects, and we do see more acceptance. When I first started talking about this, one would go to a conference and actually talk about, you'd hear people saying, well, that's kind of strange. Maybe that's kind of interesting. Now you get people who show up at conferences, other people lecturing, who are saying, we apologize, we didn't do this full IBD. I mean, it's the viewpoint is somewhat different in that the level of acceptance. And as I said, so I think that there's still strategic problems to collaboration that are making it hard to do collaboration. I understand David's position that it's easier to talk about integration than full collaboration. But I do see that, in fact, the water is rising. The percentage of projects is going up. We do have things like the Sutter Health's data, which shows that out of 25 projects that they've done, only one project, a $450 million project, was $1 million over project budget. All of the projects were at or below target cost, all of which achieved high levels of quality. They've proven that the system's reliable. So we're starting to see, and we're now, as I said, the water's rising. A broader range of owners, participants, contractors, designers are actually focusing on doing more and more IPD, or a similar. I talk IPD because most of the bulk of my work has been in North America, although also I've done work in Europe and elsewhere with the Middle East with these approaches. So I'm optimistic, but I am not one of those people who believes that just because it's superior, it will get adopted. It has to be proven.
Very, very good. I think that new tools that David told as perhaps the one of the big key to understand better this collaborative. And we have one more question. We are reaching at the end of this panel from Felipe Gutierrez. Well, how different collaborative contracts, and Felipe put it in comes, are from the alliance contracts that have been successful in certain jurisdictions, such as Australia for 15, 20 years. Well, David.
I'll give it a go. We're very lucky. We've got Doug Jones listening politely, who's on his own panel tomorrow, who knows the Australian market better than any of us. So I'm not going to be presumptuous there, but I was lucky to have Australian authors contribute to my book, so I can at least speak on their behalf. And the position in Australia, there has been some really, really interesting alliance models proven. There have been some criticisms, there have been some challenges, and Doug knows better than anyone else in translating from those excellent exemplars to mainstream adoption, even of some basic collaborative concepts. And that's people in business. Everyone is diverse. I believe I'm right, and Doug will correct me if he can reach you, that there isn't a published form of collaborative contract in Australia, and there isn't a single set of models. There are explorations of different models, so it's very difficult to talk about the Australian approach to alliancing. You can talk about it on the basis of an individual project or series of projects, but not universally. How different? There is a book that I wrote that many people on the call have contributed to: Howard, Wolfgang, Eduardo, yourself, Alexandre, that, that in 560 pages talks about the differences between collaborative and traditional approaches, talks about the differences between collaborative and alliance contracts. It is dangerous to oversimplify. I think that it is easier for the questioner if I say that fundamentals are multi-party engagement, early contractor involvement, new bases for decision-making, new types of incentivization. And if you've got those with underlying disciplines as to what data is shared, produced, when it is shared and produced, with proper hard edges, you know, you've got a starting point. There are variations, but they're not fundamental variations. You can build up the features of a modern contract, of a modern collaborative contract. And if you want to consider a real guru on the subject, it's a UK guru, it was Sir Michael Latham. He wrote about this in 1994, and he set out the features of a modern construction contract in exactly the way that we would recognize, combining a culture of collaboration with a commercial approach. So a long answer that I hope is respectful to the different approaches, but you know, one can start with some common principles which we would all recognize.
There is maybe one different. First of all, I agree there is no such thing as the Australian, the English, the American, whatever approaches. All of them, all these concepts actually are flexible and should be adapted according to the structure and the requirements of the respective projects. So maybe the reason behind your question is the following. In September 2015, the Australian government, the Department of Infrastructure, published a so-called National Alliance Contracting Guidelines, and they include a template 1, which is indeed the first standard form of a project alliance agreement I know. But people sometimes, although this is not entirely correct, but most or some of the projects in Australia based on multi-party or alliancing concepts, they do have something very special. And this is the so-called no blame, no claim culture. So they are strong believers in collaboration. They believe that real collaboration provides for, or actually does not lead to disputes of any kind whatsoever. So therefore, the contracts actually don't, all of them don't, well, actually, this one doesn't provide for any kind of ADR rather than arbitration, except willful misconduct and things like that. So it is like in Rome, when a new pope is actually to be elected, and they say, look, ladies and gentlemen, get back to each other, discuss, and once you have solved the problem, I'll let you out. That is probably one special thing which is sometimes being used in Australia, but the people who drafted or actually are in charge and responsible, who developed this idea, are not stupid, because normally in that whatever called it, it's a project where a budget is developed, and the budget consists not only of the benefit of the contractors and all the parties to the contract, rather than also the head office overheads. So you have simply more money to deal with risks which might occur. So therefore, this might allow to actually exclude any kind of dispute resolution clause.
Howard, would you like to add something?
Well, I think that the issue, for instance, alliances are also used in Canada. They're used in a number of other places. You also, when you look at a project, you have to think about what kind of risk. A lot of alliances have been basically civil projects. And if you stop and think about vertical construction, one of the biggest risks whatsoever is the lack of coordination and collaboration between the many parties. That is a major risk that impacts for virtually every project, especially if it's a highly sophisticated research or industrial facility. A civil project actually has a different set of risks. And so what you also see sometimes with the alliance projects is that there are fewer parties, and they actually tend not to flow down to incorporate as many of the people below as you would in a collaborative and integrated project, in part because they are executed by people who tend to do EPC contracts. And you also see that the focus is more on civil risk than it is, civil and political risk than it is on coordination and collaboration risk. So you see a different flavor develop in some of those contracts and some of those projects than you do with the integrated approaches, whether the PPC 2000 or others, where there's a lot more focus on spreading the collaboration down to as low a level as is reasonable. At some point in time, it doesn't become cost effective to do cost accounting systems on very small contracts, but to get as deep a collaboration as possible, which is not always, in my experience, achieved under the alliancing approach, mostly because they're focused on different risks.
Thank you. Eduardo, would you like to say something about it?
Yes. Well, in general, I would like to close up with a comment which also relates to the other questions. I cannot, of course, give an assessment as the other panelists that preceded me, but since I started working on collaborative contracts and procurement, I saw that waves are moving, and I can see it not only for the number of projects that are increasingly developing, that are increasingly being taken on, but also as collaboration is increasingly being introduced into strategic documents on the construction sector at a European level, at a UK level, and around the world. So I have to agree that the waves are moving, and if the waves are moving, it's probably because of the work of the people that are here today on this panel. So it is important to continue this path and to also discuss as they are doing, and to share probably not what are the downsides, but what can be done to make collaboration work. It was said that collaboration does not mean to take a collaborative contract, but requires a lot of work. So sharing the different perspectives and information about how different countries and how different operators in different countries operate is essential.
Very good. Well, we reached the end of this panel. It's a great honor to be here with all of you. I think that is very useful, our discussions. Thank you, Howard, Wolfgang, David, Muse, Eduardo. I invite Leonardo to make the close remarks and to present for the next day, for tomorrow. Thank you for attendees, and bye.
Oh, I have to say that was very, very nice to hear everyone in these two panels. This last panels was difficult for me, just listening, because it's the kind of discussions that makes me so, it moves me. David, maybe I can be a little bit more optimistic than you. I have to say that at least in last week, at least 2 players called me. One, I guess Howard maybe has something to do with it. But 2 players from Brazil called me trying to think of some possibility of collaboration. So it's a kind of wave that probably will not be something as a tsunami, but it's clear that when someone gets the hand of collaboration and methodologies of integration, and at least not expending so much money in conflict and lose of focus, I think the market will have at some point to follow, and it's so good to listen to you all. And this is something that we will carry on here in IBDiC, and also for sure ICLA would agree on that. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Let's do that more times. David is always with us here discussing this in our virtual breakfasts and events that we do. And let's hope that those 2 clients that I was discussing can gives us some possibility to prove how efficient this approach is. So for today, I would like again to thank our attendees, our sponsors. This event needs you for its success, and I would like to say that today was a very successful first day for this virtual event. Thanks again, ICLA, Wolfgang, all the guys that has been giving us all the support. And tomorrow we will have 2 more panels, and though they will be as interesting as this one, and these 2 actually. And please be with us tomorrow. I would like to say that we have 700 subscriptions. It's interesting that people get in and get out, watch one panel. So it's the kind of dynamics and the kind of structure that we have to understand that will change the fashion of this virtual encounters. And but it's good to know that we achieve a lot of people in this different scenario. So everyone, the first day, I think we had a lot to think, and let's close for the day, and hope you all are there with us tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
You. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.